Ontario trawls about the same number. When we predict what the year class is going to be, it's based on over 80 sites, so it's really pretty comprehensive. But we literally estimate how much area we trawl. We do the same time at every site, but obviously with speed variations, wind and current variations, we trawl a little different areas. So to correct it for what we're actually trawling, it is an area estimate, not a time estimate. There's the 2007 year class, even though these numbers are kind of offset. It was approaching average, but clearly the best thing we've seen since 2003. And at 2 years old, we estimated about 8.5 million fish. That's probably where it'll end up 5 years from now when we're looking back at it. Sometimes between 2 and 3 years old, you'll get a little bit of a change in the original estimate because we finally have harvest data on that year class, not just trawl information. But our trawl, when you look back at past years, really does a good job of predicting the year class. And unfortunately, we've seen one good year class since 2003. So what does that mean? Well, the best thing that's happened for Lake Erie fisheries management in the recent past is this. We have walleye regulations in place now that are specifically tied to each year's announced quota. The cycle that we were in the past 5 years was we literally had a year in advance to try to predict the quota. If we didn't have these right now, we'd be trying to predict what next year, 2011's quota was. So we could walk through the law change process if we needed to change the bag limit. We literally needed a year lead time to do it properly. We were able to get into law this table that says if Ohio has more than 950,000 fish quota, if the Lake Erie Committee meeting this March announces we have a quota over 950,000 fish, nothing will change. Starting May 1, we'll be in the 6 bag limit. That'll run until February. Then next March and April, we'll have 4 again. Whatever's announced sets the bag limit. If it's lower than we expect, if for some reason those 2007s come in at a little lower level than we initially predicted, if we're at 840,000, say, we'd be all the way down here at 4. But the nice thing is, the tendency is to look down here and say, oh my God, we could have a 1 or 2 bag limit. If we get down here, the bag limit's going to be the least of your problems. It's a population level issue. Most likely the next few years, we're still going to be around that million fish level, and depending what the model does, it could be a little above or below that. If you tied me down right now and said, you've got to tell me what the limit's going to be, it's going to be 5 or 6. And my gut says it's going to be 6, but it all depends where that quota falls. So it made our life a lot easier. We're no longer predicting a year in advance and being wrong about the quota. Now we let the quota tell us what the bag limit should be. And this table is based on a very complex analysis of the Creel survey. We basically looked at what do we harvest at different population and quota levels, and where does the bag limit need to be to keep us within that quota. And that's what this is all based on. So yellow perch, I'm going to wrap up here pretty quick because I want to hear Matt and Dan talk about fishing. I never want to hold up fishing talk. Perch are looking a little more positive than walleye. How many of you fished for perch in the early 90s? A few of you here in the room? Probably seemed like it was that bad, didn't it? We went through a near crash of the perch population. This is Western Basin specific. Compared to walleye, with walleye we model lake-wide. They migrate so much, we do one lake-wide walleye population estimate. With perch, we don't feel they move as much as walleye do, and they tend to stay within basins. So there's a perch model population estimate for every basin of the lake. This is a Western Basin model. In the 90s, there was a near crash, and then we recovered primarily the 96 year class, which was a really big one. But stayed pretty consistent through the late 90s, early 2000s, saw a drop off recently, and that's why the bag limit went down to 25. In the old system, we had to get a governor's order to change it the year the quota was much lower than we expected. But recently, we've actually seen some good year classes. How many of you got tired of catching 6-7 inch perch the last 2 years? There are 2 good year classes out there, and we're starting to see the benefit of that. And I think you're going to see this bump up even farther, or at least stay about where it is for 2010. We've got a pretty good perch population in the west now. Our trawls, I should have taken this 90, this is actually 96, again the numbers are offset. I should have taken that 96 out of there, because it makes, having that value on there makes these values look low. We've actually had some pretty good years of trawling lately for perch. This is 09, 08, and 07. We've got really 3 decent year classes coming there. And because of that, most likely we'll be at 30 everywhere this year. Same thing, we have a new perch bag limit scenario in law. Notice the perch quota is in pounds, it's not in number of fish like walleye are. But when each basin's perch quota is announced, let's say that it's 900,000 pounds for Ohio and the Western Basin. That's more than 800, so we'll be at 30. I think that's what will happen. We won't know until the quota is announced, but most likely we'll be at this 30 level for all basins. And you could have different regulations in each basin like we've had the last few years. You could have 30 in the west, you could have 25 in the central, you could have 30 in the east. We're at a point where it's probably going to be 30 everywhere, but this isn't across basins, this is for each basin. So it's going to be specific to each basin, and it's going to react to the quota instead of us trying to react to what we think it's going to do. And with that, I'll take any quick questions, and we'll get to Dan and start talking about fishing.
Can you attribute the fluctuation in the hatch rate from year to year or from time to time? Is there a reason for that?
That's the million-dollar question, and it obviously gets asked at every presentation. Why can't we predict what the hatch is going to be? Why do we have such variable hatch success? And I don't think most people realize how much research has been put into that the last 5 years. We've funded research through Ohio State. We're really trying to nail down why this happens, so at a bare minimum, we can be more proactive in the future. It might not be the case of being able to change what causes these differences, but at least be able to predict them farther in advance than we can right now. The easy crutch answer is weather. I really believe there's a bottleneck post-hatching. It's not how many eggs are laid, it's not how many eggs hatch, it's how many survive out of what hatches. One of the most interesting research projects looked at the peak hatching date every year and the predominant current flow during that peak hatching time, and they saw a very strong relationship between inshore and offshore flow. If there was an inshore flow when larvae were hatching, we had great year classes. If that flow brought them into warmer, productive water where food was and where they could grow better, they survived. If there was an offshore flow, and this is specifically around the reef area, this doesn't touch on the rivers, but if there was an offshore flow, we had a horrible year class. If they got swept out into the cooler, less productive water, they just didn't survive. They have to have food when they need food. So it's not even just what conditions we need, it's timing. What happens when they hatch, what happens when they need food. And I know that's kind of an easy answer to say that and say we can't do anything about it. But the best thing we can do is manage what we have and then try to better understand what leads to those conditions. And right now we're basically managing harvest. Obviously, that's the best control we have over what happens in the population. But we're trying to better understand what leads to those population numbers so we can better manage harvest.